He was only $4.57 short, but somehow it felt like the whole world was watching him fail. The scanner beeped once, sharp and final, then fell silent as if even the machine knew something was wrong. The cashier's hand hovered over the register, her smile thinning into something practiced but tired, while the man on the other side of the counter, Walter Hayes, though no one there knew his name, stood frozen with a loaf of bread cradled gently in his weathered hands, as if it were something fragile, something earned, something he wasn't ready to let go of yet. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, casting a pale, unforgiving glow over the small grocery store, turning every wrinkle on his face into a map of years that had not been kind, and every movement into something slower, heavier, like time itself had settled into his bones. Behind him, a line had begun to form, boots shifting on linoleum, a quiet impatience building in the air, not loud enough to call out, but sharp enough to feel. Walter reached into his coat pocket, fingers trembling slightly as they searched for coins that weren't there, then into the other pocket, slower this time, as if hoping the second attempt might change the outcome. But all he found was the soft rustle of empty fabric. He exhaled, long and shallow, the kind of breath a man takes when he already knows how this ends. "Sir, you're short," the cashier said, her voice careful, not unkind, but distant like she had said it too many times before. $4.57. Such a small number, barely enough to notice for most people in the room. Yet it stood between him and something as simple as bread, something as basic as dignity. A quiet chuckle slipped from somewhere in a line, quickly swallowed, but not before it landed. Walter lowered his eyes, not in shame exactly, but in something deeper, something heavier, as if he had carried this moment long before it ever arrived. He started to pull the bread back, slow, deliberate, like a soldier retreating from a position he could no longer hold. The scent of warm bakery crust lingered in the air, soft and inviting, cruel in its simplicity. A few feet behind him stood Ethan Cole, tall, steady, the kind of man who moved like he was still following orders even in a place like this. His posture quiet but deliberate, his gaze fixed not on the bread, not on the cashier, but on the man in front of him. Beside Ethan, sitting perfectly still, was Rex, a German shepherd with a coat that caught the light in shades of sable and shadow, ears alert, eyes sharp, watching everything without moving an inch. Ethan didn't speak, didn't step forward, not yet, but there was something in his expression, something that shifted the moment he noticed the edge of a worn metal tag peeking out from beneath Walter's collar, barely visible, scratched with time, the kind of detail most people would miss entirely. Rex noticed it too. His ears twitched, just once, subtle but certain, as if a signal had passed through him that no one else could hear. The line behind them shifted again, a sigh, a cough, a quiet impatience growing heavier by the second. Walter's fingers tightened slightly around the loaf before loosening, surrendering, ready to place it back on the counter, to walk away unnoticed, just another man who came up short. But Rex didn't look away. He stayed locked on Walter, still as stone, as if waiting for something the rest of the world had already given up on. And in that suspended moment between the beep of a machine and the weight of a decision, something unseen began to move, something quiet, something small, the kind of moment that doesn't look like a miracle until it already is. Before we begin, tell me, we're witching for Drop Your Country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The bread hovered in Walter's hands for a second longer before he finally began to lower it. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the slow, careful motion of a man who had learned how to let go of things without making a scene. His fingers lingered on the paper wrapping as if memorizing the texture, the faint warmth still trapped inside, then loosened just enough to place it back onto the counter. And for a moment it sat there between him and the cashier like a quiet verdict. The hum of the lights pressed down, heavier, and somewhere near the refrigerated aisle a door closed with a dull thud that echoed more than it should have. Walter straightened his shoulders out of habit, the kind drilled into him long before this store, long before this moment, but the posture could not quite hide the subtle tremor that remained in his hands. He reached for his wallet again, opening it as if hoping something might have appeared in the last few seconds. But it was still the same thin leather, worn at the edges. Holding nothing but a faded photograph tucked into the corner and a single receipt folded twice. He stared at it briefly, then closed it with a soft click that sounded louder than the scanner had. Behind him, a man shifted his weight and exhaled sharply. Not angry, just impatient, the kind of sound people make when they believe time is being taken from them. Walter nodded, once to no one in particular. A quiet acknowledgement that he understood, that he would not hold anyone up any longer. Slid the loaf a few inches farther away, enough to signal that he was done, that the decision had been made. Ethan watched it happen without moving, his jaw tightening just slightly, not in anger, but in recognition, as if he had seen this moment before in a different place, under a different sky. Beside him, Rex's focus did not waver. The dog's amber eyes remained fixed on Walter, tracking every motion, every hesitation, every small surrender that passed unnoticed by the rest of the room. There was a shift in Rex's posture then, almost imperceptible at first, a slight lean forward, a change in the angle of his head, the kind of adjustment that would mean nothing to anyone who did not know him. Ethan noticed. His hand moved instinctively toward the leash, not pulling, just resting there, a silent question passing between them. Rex did not look at him. He did not need to. Something in the air had changed, something quiet but certain, like a signal carried in a frequency too soft for human ears. Walter turned slightly, preparing to step away from the counter, his gaze still lowered, his movements measured, controlled, as if leaving with dignity mattered more than anything he could have. Carried out in a bag. The cashier had already reached for the next customer, her fingers tapping lightly against the register, ready to move on, ready to forget. And then Rex stood, not abruptly, not with any sudden burst of energy, but with a deliberate, steady motion that drew attention without asking for it. His paws met the floor with a soft, confident sound, nails clicking once against the tile as he stepped forward, leaving Ethan's side without command. Without hesitation, the leash slid through Ethan's fingers before he caught it, not to stop him, but to follow. A few heads turned then, curiosity flickering across faces that had been moments away from indifference. Rex moved past the line, straight toward the counter, his body calm, controlled, as if he had done this 100 times before. Walter noticed him only when the dog came close enough to enter his peripheral vision, and he paused, unsure, one hand still resting lightly on the edge of the counter. Rex stopped beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and for a brief second the old man's breath caught, not in fear, but in something like recognition. The dog lowered his head slightly, eyes lifting to meet Walter's, steady and unblinking, holding a gaze that felt less like an animal's instinct and more like a question waiting for an answer. The room quieted without anyone asking it to. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade into the background, as if making space for whatever was about to happen. Ethan stepped forward now, just one pace, not interrupting, not calling Rex back, his eyes narrowing slightly as he watched the interaction unfold. This was not a command he had given. This was not part of any training routine he had ever run, and yet Rex stood there with a certainty that felt practiced, intentional, as if guided by something deeper than obedience. Walter's fingers tightened again, not on the bread this time, but on the edge of the counter, grounding himself in the moment, unsure of what this animal wanted, unsure of why it had chosen him. And Rex, without breaking eye contact, shifted his weight forward just enough to begin whatever came next. Rex did not rush, did not bark, did not draw attention with noise or force. Instead, he lowered his head slowly, almost respectfully, as if approaching something sacred rather than stepping into a crowded store. And then, with a quiet precision that made the moment feel rehearsed, he nudged gently at the side pouch attached to his working vest. The fabric shifted with a soft scrape, barely audible. Yet somehow it echoed through the stillness that had settled over the checkout lane. Walter watched, confused at first, his brow tightening slightly as he tried to understand what the dog was doing, while the cashier paused mid-motion, her hand hovering over the keypad. her eyes flicking from the dog to the man and back again. Ethan's grip on the leash remained steady but loose, his gaze sharpened now. Not in alarm, but in disbelief, because he knew that pouch, knew exactly what it was for, and more importantly, what it was not meant to do. Rex slipped his nose beneath the flap with careful intent, then lifted it just enough to catch the edge of something inside. A small canvas bag, worn but clean, tied loosely at the top with a thin cord. He tugged once, gentle but firm, and the bag slid free, dropping softly against the counter with a muted thud that seemed louder than it should have been. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the man at the back of the line who had sighed earlier now stood completely still, his impatience replaced by something quieter, something uncertain. Rex stepped back half a pace, leaving the bag between Walter and the register, then looked up again, his amber eyes steady, expectant, as if he had simply placed the next piece in a sequence that everyone else had yet to understand. Walter hesitated, his hand hovering above the small bag, unsure if it was meant for him, unsure if touching it would break some unspoken rule. I do not think that is mine," he murmured, his voice low, careful, the kind of tone used by someone who has spent years avoiding mistakes. Rex did not react to the words, only held the gaze, unwavering. Ethan stepped closer then, just enough to reach the counter, his eyes dropping to the bag before lifting again to Rex, searching for an explanation. That did not come. "Rex," he said quietly. Not a command, more a question, but the dog did not move. There was a beat, a long suspended second where the entire store seemed to wait for permission to breathe again. Then Walter, slowly, almost reluctantly, untied the thin cord. His fingers fumbled once, then steadied, the motion becoming more deliberate as the knot loosened. The bag opened just enough for the contents to shift, and a faint metallic clink slipped into the air. Coins, folded bills. Not much, but more than nothing. Walter's breath caught, not sharply, but deeply, as if something inside his chest had been pulled tight and then suddenly released. He glanced up at Ethan, confusion and disbelief mixing in his eyes, searching for confirmation, for denial, for anything that would explain what he was seeing. Ethan shook his head once, slow, honest. That is not from me," he said, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. The cashier leaned forward slightly, her earlier impatience gone, replaced by a cautious curiosity as she looked into the bag, then at the totals still displayed on the screen, for $1.57. The number had not changed, but something else had. Walter looked back down at the money, then at the bread still resting on the counter, then finally at Rex, who stood there as if none of this was unusual, as if placing that bag had been the most natural thing in the world. The old man's hand trembled again, but this time not from emptiness. He reached into the bag and counted slowly, each coin deliberate, each bill unfolded with care, until the total matched exactly what was needed. Not more, not less. Exact. He placed the money on the counter with a precision that felt almost ceremonial, then stopped, his fingers lingering there as if unsure whether to pull away. The cashier processed the payment without speaking, the machine beeping once more, softer this time, almost gentle, and as the receipt printed, a quiet realization settled over the room, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. This had not been training. This had not been coincidence. This had been something else entirely. Rex did not wag his tail. He did not seek praise. He simply stood there, watching Walter with the calm, steady presence of someone who understood a need before it was ever spoken. The receipt slid forward with a soft whisper of paper against plastic, and for a moment Walter did not reach for it, as if the transaction itself had not fully settled into reality. His eyes remained fixed on the small canvas bag, then lifted slowly toward Rex again, searching, not for explanation anymore, but for something deeper, something that felt strangely familiar, like a memory he could not quite place. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out at first, only a breath that trembled, just enough to betray what he was holding back. "Son," he began quietly, though it was not clear whether he was speaking to Ethan or to the dog. "I have seen a lot of things in my life, but I have never seen anything like this. His voice carried no exaggeration, no attempt to make the moment larger than it was, just a simple truth laid gently into the air. Ethan shifted his weight, his eyes still on Rex, then on the bag, then back to Walter, as if trying to reconstruct the last few seconds into something that made sense. He is trained to detect stress, Ethan said after a pause, his tone careful, almost uncertain. Changes in breathing, posture, sometimes even things we miss. But this, he trailed off, the sentence unfinished because there was no clean way to finish it. Walter nodded slowly, his gaze drifting downward as his fingers finally reached for the receipt, folding it once, then again. A habit more than a necessity. The bread was placed into a thin paper bag now. And when he took it, he held it close, not protectively, but with a quiet gratitude that seemed to extend beyond the item itself. A silence settled again, but it was no longer heavy or awkward. It was different now, softer, like a room after a prayer that no one had planned to say. One of the customers in line cleared his throat, not impatient this time, but unsure of what to do with his own hands, his own place in what had just happened. The cashier offered Walter a small nod, her expression gentler than before, her earlier tension gone, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. Walter turned slightly toward Ethan, then back to Rex, his movements slower now, more deliberate, as if he wanted to make sure this moment did not slip past him unnoticed. "What is his name?" he asked. "Rex," Ethan replied. Walter repeated it under his breath, once as if testing the weight of it, then nodded again. He shifted his grip on the bag of bread, and, with a hesitation that felt almost ceremonial, extended his free hand toward the dog. Rex did not move. Immediately, he waited, watching Walter's hand approach, reading something unseen, something deeper than the gesture itself. Then, gently, he leaned forward just enough to let his nose brush against the man's fingers. It was a small contact, brief, almost nothing to an outside observer. But Walter's hand stilled as if the touch had carried something through it, something steady, something grounding. His shoulders lowered slightly, the tension he had carried into the store easing in a way that had nothing to do with money or bread. Ethan watched closely, his expression shifting in ways he did not quite control, because he had seen Rex do many things in training, in controlled environments, under clear commands, but this was different. This was quiet, intentional, almost personal. He knew. Walter said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. He knew before I said a word. Ethan did not answer, because he could not. Instead, he gave the leash a gentle slack, allowing Rex to remain where he was, allowing the moment to stretch just a little longer. Walter withdrew his hand slowly, nodding once more, then turned toward the exit. His steps were measured, steady, not hurried, and as he walked past the line of customers, something subtle shifted in the room. People moved slightly to give him space, not out of obligation, but out of something closer to recognition. The door chimed softly as it opened, letting in a thin stream of cool air that carried the faint scent of the outside world. Walter paused just before stepping through, turning back one last time. His eyes met Ethan's first, then Rex's, and for a brief second, something passed between them that needed no words, no explanation, a quiet understanding, soldier to soldier, even if only one of them wore the uniform now. Then he stepped out into the daylight, the door closing gently behind him, leaving the store a little quieter, a little different than it had been before. The door settled shut with a soft click, and for a few seconds no one inside the store moved, as if the moment had followed Walter out and left something unfinished behind. The hum of the fluorescent lights returned slowly, filling the space again, but sounded different now, less harsh, almost distant. Ethan stood where he was, his eyes still on the glass door, watching the faint outline of Walter's figure move across the parking lot, small against the stretch of asphalt and late afternoon light. Rex remained beside him, calm, composed, as if nothing unusual had happened, his ears relaxed but attentive, his posture steady in that quiet way that always made it seem like he was listening to something beyond the room. Ethan finally exhaled, a breath he had not realized he was holding, and glanced down at the dog. "You want to tell me what that was?" he murmured under his breath, not expecting an answer, but asking anyway. Rex did not respond, only shifted his gaze briefly toward Ethan before looking back toward the door, as if the story was not finished yet. Behind them, the line slowly began to move again, people stepping forward one by one, but there was a subtle change in their movements, less impatience, more awareness, as if each person carried a piece of what they had just witnessed. The cashier rang up the next item, her motions quieter now, more deliberate, and when Ethan stepped forward to pay for his own groceries, she gave him a small look, not quite a smile, not quite a question, something in between. "Your dog," she started, then stopped, shaking her head slightly, as if words would only make it smaller than it was. Ethan nodded once, understanding the unfinished sentence better than any explanation could complete it. He paid, gathered his bag, and turned toward the exit, Rex falling in a step beside him without command, the leash loose between them. Outside, the air was cooler, carrying the faint scent of pavement and distant traffic, and the sky had shifted into that soft, fading gold that comes just before evening. Walter was still there, standing near the edge of the parking lot, not walking away now, but paused beside an old bench near the storefront, the paper bag of bread held carefully in one hand. He was looking down at something in his other hand, something small, something he had not taken out inside the store. Ethan slowed his pace, noticing the stillness in the man's posture, the way his shoulders had drawn inward again, not in the same way as before, but with a different kind of weight. Rex noticed it too. His ears lifted slightly, his steps adjusting without breaking rhythm, guiding Ethan closer without pulling, without urgency. As they approached, Walter looked up, his expression softer now, but there was something else there, something unresolved. "I was going to leave," Walter said quietly, his voice carrying just enough to reach them. "Just take the bread and go home like nothing happened." He paused, glancing down at the small object in his hand before lifting it slightly. It was a dog tag, old, edges worn smooth by years of contact, the chain broken near the clasp. "But then I remembered," he continued, his words slower now, as if each one had to pass through something heavy before it could be spoken. "I used to carry this everywhere. Never took it off, not even when I slept." Ethan stepped closer, his gaze settling on the tag, recognizing it instantly. Not the name or the engraving, but what it meant, what it represented. Rex moved just ahead of him, stopping at a respectful distance, his attention fixed once again on Walter, not the bread, not the bag, but the man himself. Walter's hand trembled slightly as he turned the tag over, the faint metal catching the last light of the day. "I stopped wearing it a while back," he said, almost to himself. Figured no one needed to know anymore. There was no bitterness in his tone, only a quiet resignation, the kind that settles in over time without asking permission. Rex stepped forward then, just one small step, enough to close the distance between them again, his presence. Steady, grounded. Walter looked at him, really looked this time, as if seeing something he had missed before, something that had been there all along. "You saw it, did you not?" he whispered, not expecting an answer, but asking anyway. Rex did not move, did not blink, just held the gaze calm and certain. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, something he could not name, something that felt older than logic, older than training. Walter closed his fingers gently around the dog tag, then slipped it back into his pocket, not hiding it, but keeping it close again. "Thank you," he said, the words simple, but carrying more than gratitude, something closer to recognition, to being seen. Rex's tail moved once, slow and quiet. Not excitement, not pride, just acknowledgement. The three of them stood there for a moment longer, the noise of the world moving around them again. Cars passing, doors opening and closing. But within that small space, there was a stillness that did not break. And in that stillness, something had been returned, not money, not bread, but a piece of something that had almost been forgotten. The wind moved lightly across the parking lot, carrying with it the faint rustle of dry leaves and the distant hum of traffic from the main road, a steady reminder that the world had not stopped, even if something inside this small moment had. Walter stood there a little longer than necessary, his hand resting over the pocket where he had placed the dog tag, not gripping it tightly, but holding it with a quiet awareness, as if reacquainting himself with something he had almost forgotten belonged to him. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, glancing once at Rex before looking back at the older man, unsure whether to speak or simply let the silence do its work. It was Rex who moved first, not forward this time, not toward Walter, but slightly to the side, positioning himself between the two men in a way that felt less like separation and more like connection, his presence bridging something that words could not quite reach. Walter noticed the movement and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging a gesture only he fully understood. "You ever notice," Walter said after a moment, his voice softer now, steadier, "how some things do not come back all at once, they come back in pieces?" Ethan listened, his expression calm, attentive, the way one soldier listens to another without interrupting. Walter continued, his gaze drifting past them toward the horizon where the light had begun to fade into deeper shades of evening. "You lose something, not all at once, just a little at a time, a name, a place, a reason to stand up straight in the morning, and after a while, you forget you were ever standing tall to begin with." His words did not carry self-pity, only a quiet honesty that made them land heavier. Rex's ears flicked once, catching the cadence of the voice, the subtle shift in tone, and he stepped closer again, not urgent, not intrusive, just present. Walter looked down at him, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth for the first time, not wide, not bright, but real. "And then something or someone reminds you," he said, his hand lowering slightly as if to meet the dog halfway, though he stopped just short of touching him again. Ethan felt the weight of that statement settle in his chest, deeper than expected, because it was not just about Walter anymore. It was about every man who had ever walked away from something that once defined him, and every quiet moment when that identity felt just out of reach. He was not trained for that. Ethan said finally, his voice low, almost reflective, more to himself than to Walter, "Not for this kind of thing." Walter gave a soft exhale that might have been a laugh if it had carried more sound. "Maybe not," he replied, "or maybe some things do not need training." The words hung there for a second, simple but undeniable. Rex shifted his stance again, his gaze moving briefly between the two men, as if tracking the exchange, absorbing it in a way that did not require understanding in human terms. A car passed behind them, tires crunching lightly over gravel, headlights sweeping across the pavement before disappearing again, and with it the last strong light of the day began to fade, leaving behind a softer, quieter glow. Walter adjusted his grip on the bag of bread, not tightening it, but settling it more comfortably in his hand, like something he intended to carry all the way home. "I used to think," he said, his voice trailing slightly before finding its place again, "that the hardest part was what happened out there. But it is not. It is what comes after, when no one is looking, when no one is keeping score." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding more than he could say, the kind of understanding that did not need explanation. Rex stepped forward, one last time, closing the small gap that remained. And this time when Walter lowered his hand, the contact came naturally, his fingers resting briefly against the side of the dog's neck, feeling the steady warmth beneath the fur, the calm rhythm that did not change. It was grounding in a way that felt almost familiar, like holding on to something solid after standing too long on uncertain ground. Walter withdrew his hand after a moment, not abruptly, but with care, as if ending something properly mattered. "You take care of him," he said quietly to Ethan, though his eyes remained on Rex. "And he will take care of more than you expect." Ethan let out a small breath, something close to a quiet acknowledgement, and gave a slight nod. "I think he already does," he answered. Walter gave that same faint smile again, then turned, this time without hesitation, his steps steady as he began to walk across the lot. Not rushed, not weighed down, just moving forward. Rex watched him go until the distance softened his outline into the fading light, and even then, he did not move right away, as if making sure the man carried something more than just bread as he left. And in that quiet space between departure and memory, something small but lasting had shifted, Not loud enough for the world to notice, but strong enough to stay. The last trace of Walter's figure faded into the distance, swallowed gently by the dimming light. And for a long second after he was gone, neither Ethan nor Rex moved. The parking lot felt larger now, quieter in a way that was not empty but reflective, as if the space itself had absorbed something and was still holding on to it. A shopping cart rolled lazily across a distant row, pushed by a faint breeze, its wheels rattling softly against the uneven pavement, a small, ordinary sound that somehow carried more weight than it should have. Ethan finally shifted, his boots scraping lightly as he turned, but his gaze lingered in the direction Walter had gone, as if part of him was still following. "You felt that, did you not?" he said under his breath, not looking at Rex, but speaking to him all the same. Rex remained still for a moment longer, then slowly turned his head toward Ethan, his expression calm, steady, unreadable in the way only a dog's gaze can be when it holds something deeper than instinct. Ethan let out a quiet breath, something between a sigh and a release, and adjusted the strap of the grocery bag in his hand. "I have worked with you for 3 years," he continued, his voice low, reflective, seen you track, detect, respond to things no one else could, but that was not protocol. Rex stepped forward then, not toward the store, not toward the car, but toward Ethan, closing the small distance between them until he stood close at his side again, as if returning to formation. The leash hung loose, untouched, unnecessary. The sky above had shifted further now, the gold fading into a cooler blue, the first hints of evening settling in with a quiet certainty. A car door slammed somewhere behind them, followed by laughter, distant. Disconnected from the moment they had just shared, life continued, as it always did, unaware of the quiet weight that had passed through this small corner of it. Ethan began to walk, slow at first, his steps unhurried, Rex moving in perfect rhythm beside him, their shadows stretching long across the pavement under the soft glow of the overhead lights that had just flickered on. They reached Ethan's truck, parked near the edge of the lot, and he paused with his hand on the door handle, glancing down at Rex again. "Where did you even get that money?" he asked quietly, his tone not demanding an answer, but genuinely searching. Rex did not respond in any way that could be translated into words, but there was a subtle shift in his posture, a stillness that felt deliberate, as if the answer was not meant to be explained, only understood. Ethan opened the door, setting the grocery bag inside before leaning back slightly against the frame, his eyes drifting toward the store entrance one more time. "There's a fund," he said slowly, almost thinking out loud, "for veterans' small donations, cash kept in the vest for emergencies, but you have never used it before." "Not once." He paused, the realization forming not as a sudden revelation, but as something quieter, something that settled into place piece by piece. Rex had not used it because there had never been a moment like that. Not until now. Ethan rubbed a hand along the back of his neck, a habit he had picked up years ago, one that surfaced when something did not fit neatly into reason. "You chose him," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Rex looked up at him then, ears forward, eyes steady, not seeking approval, not waiting for praise, just present, the kind of presence that did not need to justify itself. Ethan let out a faint, almost disbelieving laugh, shaking his head once. "Yeah," he added softly, "I think you did." He closed the truck door gently, not getting in yet, not ready to leave just yet, because something about the moment asked for a pause, a quiet acknowledgement before moving on. The lights above flickered once more, then steadied, casting a soft glow over the emptying lot. A few remaining customers moved in and out of the store, their footsteps fading into the background. But for Ethan and Rex, the noise had already fallen away. What remained was something quieter, something that did not need to be spoken aloud. Ethan reached down and rested his hand briefly on the side of Rex's neck, feeling the warmth, the steady presence that had grounded him more times than he could count. "You remind me," he said quietly, "that not everything worth doing comes with an order." Rex did not move, did not react, but the stillness itself felt like agreement. And as they stood there, under the soft hum of the parking lot lights, something settled between them. Not a conclusion, not an ending, but a quiet understanding that some missions are never written down, never assigned, and yet they're carried out with a precision and purpose that no training manual could ever teach. The engine of the truck clicked softly as it cooled, a faint ticking sound that blended into the quiet rhythm of the evening, and for a while Ethan did not move to get inside, his hand still resting lightly against the metal door, as if stepping away from this moment too quickly might cause something important to slip through the cracks. Rex remained beside him, steady as ever, his presence neither demanding nor passive, simply there in the way that had begun to feel less like companionship, and more like something deeper, something anchored. Across the parking lot, the automatic doors of the store opened and closed in slow intervals, letting out brief bursts of light and sound before sealing them back in again, like breaths in a steady pattern. Ethan's gaze drifted toward those doors once more, not because he expected Walter to return, but because part of him was still trying to understand what had just unfolded, not in facts, not in logic, but in meaning. "You ever notice," he said, quietly, his voice carrying just enough to reach Rex, "how the smallest things are the ones that stay with you the longest?" Rex did not respond in any outward way, but his ears shifted slightly, catching the tone, the weight behind the words. Ethan exhaled slowly, his breath visible now in the cooling air, and pushed himself upright from the truck, not getting in, not yet. He turned, leaning back against the door instead, his eyes scanning the lot in a slow, thoughtful arc, as if seeing it differently now. A young couple walked past at a distance, laughing softly, unaware of the quiet shift that had taken place just minutes earlier. A cart collector guided a line of carts toward the entrance, metal clinking gently against metal. Ordinary sounds, ordinary movements, and yet none of it felt quite the same. Ethan reached down absently and adjusted the strap on Rex's vest, his fingers brushing against the small pouch that had held the money, and he paused there for a second, his hand lingering as if the fabric itself might offer an answer. "You carried that for months," he murmured. More to himself than to the dog. "Never once touched it. Not even when we passed people who needed help. Not even when I thought maybe we should." His brow tightened slightly, not in frustration, but in reflection. Rex shifted his weight subtly under the touch, steady, grounded, offering nothing more than presence. Ethan let his hand fall away, shaking his head once, a faint smile touching the edge of his expression, though it was not amusement. It was recognition. "You waited," he said softly, the realization settling deeper now. "You waited for him." The words did not sound strange as they left his mouth. They sounded right, in a way that logic could not argue with. Rex looked up at him then, his eyes catching the overhead light, calm and unwavering. And for a moment it felt like there was no distance between understanding and silence, like both meant the same thing. A light flickered on above the far corner of the lot, casting a pale glow across the empty spaces where cars had once been, stretching shadows long and thin. Ethan glanced at it briefly, then back at Rex, and nodded once, not to confirm anything out loud, but to accept it. "You saw something I did not," he said, his tone quiet, respectful, "something I might have missed if you had not been here." Rex did not react, but his stillness carried a kind of quiet agreement, the kind that does not need to be proven. Ethan opened the truck door again, this time climbing in, the seat creaking slightly under his weight, and Rex followed after him without hesitation, settling into his usual place with a calm that matched the moment. For a second, neither of them moved. The interior of the truck held a different kind of silence, enclosed, intimate, like a pause between chapters. Ethan rested his hands on the steering wheel, but did not start the engine yet. Instead, he looked straight ahead through the windshield, watching the reflection of the store lights shimmer faintly against the glass. "There are things we are trained for," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper now. "And then there are things we are meant for." The words hung in the air, simple, but weighted with something that felt larger than either of them. Rex shifted slightly beside him, settling deeper in a place, his breathing slow, steady, unchanging. Ethan finally turned the key, the engine coming to life with a low, steady rumble. But even as the truck prepared to move, the moment did not feel like it was ending. It felt like it was carrying forward, like something had been set in motion that would not stay confined to a single evening or a single place. And as the headlights cut through the dimming lot, and the truck eased slowly toward the exit, there was a quiet certainty that what had happened back there would not be forgotten, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was small, precise, and exactly where it needed to be. The truck rolled slowly out of the parking lot, tires humming softly against the pavement as the last glow of the storefront lights faded behind them. And for a while, neither Ethan nor Rex made a sound. The silence inside the cab not empty but full, carrying everything that had just happened without needing to repeat it. The road ahead stretched quiet and open, lined with dim streetlights that cast long pools of amber light across the asphalt, each one passing over the windshield in steady intervals like a slow heartbeat. Ethan kept his hands relaxed on the wheel, his gaze forward, but his mind was still somewhere back in that store, replaying the small details, the subtle shifts, the way a moment so simple had unfolded into something that did not feel simple at all. Rex lay beside him, steady as ever, his breathing calm, his presence unchanged. And yet Ethan could not shake the feeling that something between them had deepened, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, permanent one. A few miles down the road, Ethan slowed at a red light, the truck idling softly as the signal glowed above, and in the reflection of the windshield, he caught a faint glimpse of himself, the lines of his face softened by the dim light, his expression more thoughtful than usual. He glanced over at Rex, then back at the road, and let out a slow breath. "You know," he said quietly, his voice low enough that it barely filled the space between them. "Back there, it was not about the money." The words felt obvious once spoken, but they carried a weight that settled deeper than expected. The light changed, and Ethan eased forward again, the truck moving smoothly through the intersection. It was about being seen, he continued, almost to himself, about someone noticing before it was too late to matter. Rex did not respond, but his presence remained constant, the kind of quiet that listens without interrupting. The road curved gently, leading them toward the outskirts of town, where the lights grew fewer and the darkness stretched wider. And as they drove, Ethan found himself thinking not about the action itself, but about the timing, the precision of it, the way Rex had waited until the exact moment it mattered most. "You did not just react," he said, his tone steady now, more certain. "You chose the moment." The realization settled into him fully then, not as a question, but as an acceptance of something he could not explain, but no longer needed to. A small farmhouse appeared in the distance, its porch light glowing softly against the night, a quiet reminder that somewhere, not too far away, someone was likely sitting down with a simple meal, maybe even that same loaf of bread, and for the first time in a long while, not feeling invisible. Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel just slightly, then relaxed it again, the motion subtle but intentional. "There are things we carry," he said, his voice softer now, almost reflective, "not because we have to, but because someone else might need them one day." Rex shifted slightly beside him, settling deeper into the seat, his breathing steady, unchanging, as if the truth in those words required no acknowledgement. The truck continued down the road, the hum of the engine blending with the quiet rhythm of the night, and for a moment, everything felt aligned in a way that was difficult to describe but impossible to ignore. Ethan glanced at Rex one more time, then back at the road ahead, and gave a small nod, not to confirm anything out loud, but to carry it forward. "No one left behind," he said quietly, the words not spoken as a command, not even as a statement, but as something closer to a promise. Rex remained still, his presence unwavering, and in that silence, the meaning of the moment settled fully into place, not loud, not dramatic, but lasting. The truck disappeared into the stretch of dark road ahead, headlights cutting a steady path through the night, carrying with it a story that would never need to be told again to be remembered, because some moments do not end when they are over. They continue in the way they change the ones who live them, quietly, completely, and without asking for recognition. In a quiet grocery store under cold fluorescent lights, a U.S. Marine witnesses an elderly veteran come up just a few dollars short for a simple loaf of bread, a small moment that carries the weight of dignity, memory, and unseen struggle. What follows is not a loud act of heroism, but a quiet, unforgettable gesture led by a loyal German Shepherd K9, turning this into one of the most powerful animal stories about compassion, honor, and the unspoken bond between humans and animals. As the veteran faces a moment of silent humiliation, the Marine observes without judgment while the K9 senses something deeper than words, stepping in with an unexpected act that shifts the entire atmosphere of the store and reminds everyone present that even the smallest kindness can restore something much greater than what was lost. This emotional journey unfolds beyond a simple transaction, revealing how animal stories can capture moments where humanity is quietly rebuilt, where a soldier's past is remembered through a worn dog tag, and where a Marine learns that not every mission is assigned. Some are simply felt. Through subtle details, steady pacing, and cinematic storytelling, this narrative explores how a K9 partner can recognize distress before it's spoken, reinforcing why animal stories continue to resonate so deeply with audiences who seek meaning, empathy, and connection. As the story moves from the store to the quiet evening outside, the veteran regains not just bread but a sense of identity, while the Marine reflects on the deeper purpose behind loyalty and service, making this one of those rare animal stories that linger long after the moment has passed, grounded in realism. Yet elevated by emotional truth, this story highlights the powerful role of a trained German Shepherd who acts not out of command, but out of instinct and understanding, showing that the strongest bonds are often built in silence. Whether you are drawn to military themes, human resilience, or the quiet intelligence of working dogs, this is one of those unforgettable animal stories that speaks to the idea that no one should ever feel invisible, and that sometimes the smallest act of mercy can restore two souls at once.